Hi, I'm David from SQL Undercover and welcome along to the first module in our SQL Undercover Academy SQL Server Backup and Recovery course, taking and restoring a backup. So why are we starting off? Why are we starting with backup and recovery? When people come to me, they often say to me, hey Dave, I want to be a DBA. What's the first thing I should learn, Should I learn about indexing? Should I learn about query tuning? And my answer is always going to be learn backups, learn backup and recovery. It's most easily the most important skill for any DBA. There's not much point in being that index tuning guru, that query tuning wizard. If one day you come in the office, your SQL servers are on fire, and you don't know how to recover, your backup strategy is just not there. You're going to be looking for a new job. So that is why we're going to start off with SQL Server Backup and Recovery. So what are we going to be covering on this first module? We're going to have a look at how to take a full backup. So we're going to look at restoring a full backup. We're going to look at differential backups. We're going to look at how to take a differential backup. And we're going to look at how to restore a differential backup. So a little bit about a full backup first. What is actually in a full backup? Now, a full backup contains all the data in a database. Well, all the committed data, all the committed transactions in your database. It doesn't include any empty space. So what do I mean by that? If we think about a database, so we've got a database that's 100 gig in size, there could only be, perhaps there's 50 gig of data and 100 gig of empty space. The backup is only going to include those data pages. Those empty pages, they're not going to go in our backup, they don't get included. It's an online operation, so it doesn't cause any blocking, it doesn't cause any downtime. So this is kind of quite important. Some people seem to think that if you take a full backup, you've got to have all the users out of the system. Some database systems, that is the case. With SQL Server, it's not. With SQL Server, a backup is not an online operation, so we can do it while users are in the system. There might be some performance considerations, but okay, that's something we can look at in a future module. But for now, all you need to know is that a backup is an online operation and we can do it with the system running. And I do it all the time. I have systems running that are quite busy, very, very busy, some big databases with full backups going on during the day. And any performance hit is negligible, if anything, I'll be honest with you. It includes all committed transactions up to the point that the backup completes. So again, another question I get asked quite often is, my backup, what does my backup actually include? Does it include all the data to the point that I start the backup? Or does it include all the data up to the point at the end of the backup? So when I'm backing my database up, am I including any changes that are going on during that backup? And the answer is yes, you are. Yes, you are. So your database is going to include all the data up to the point that the backup completes. It's not entirely true, but pretty much, And we'll cover the example. We'll cover where it's not true and the little nuances there in a future module. But for argument's sake, for now, you can just assume that your backup is going to include all the data up to the point the backup completes. So the backup command, how do we go about actually taking this backup? Well, we start off with a simple command, is backup database a database name. Okay, very, very simple. We tend to see what to do. We're saying I want to back up a database, SQL Undercover database, for example. We then need to tell it where to send the backup to. So now 99% of the time you are going to be backing up to a file on disk. There are a few examples, a few scenarios where that might change, that might be different. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to back up to disk. So for this course, we'll look at other backup locations in a future module. But for now, we're just going to be backing up to disk. So we're going to say we're going to back up to disk and we're going to give it the file location and the backup name and the file name. And we also need to include any extension. Normally people would use a back extension for a backup file. SQL by default will not append an extension to a backup file. It doesn't actually care what the extension is, but normal practice is to include a .back. There are a couple of with commands that we can think about. There is with stats. So with stats will give us kind of a little progress as the backup's running. So it'll tell us how far through the backup we are. It'll give us like a little percentage. You're 10% through, you're 20% through, you're 30% through. If you don't care about that, you don't want to see that, then you can omit with stats. But if you're taking a backup through Management Studio, like we'll be doing in a minute, it's useful to see where you're at. If you're taking, perhaps you've got backups running through an agent job or something similar, some sort of scheduled mechanism, you might not want to worry about that. We've got checksum. Now checksum is something I would always include. Again, we're going to cover exactly what checksum does in a future module, but for now, it's something I'd always include. And we have compression. So within SQL Server, we can compress our backups. And generally, when a backup is compressed, it performs much better. It will back up quicker. It will restore quicker. People seem to think, why is that? Why can we, if we compress a backup, surely it would take longer, wouldn't it? Because it was doing more. It doesn't, because the hit on I/O with a compressed backup is much less than a full-size backup. You can get a backup, when you compress it, you'll get about a third of the size of the database. So you reduce I/O massively. You increase CPU slightly, but you reduce I/O massively, so you tend to get a much better recovery times, better backup times if you compress your database, compress your backups. Again, SQL Server, depending on your SQL Server setup, you may actually have compression switched on by default, so you may not need that with command, but again, it's good practice just to use it. So, let's dive over to Management Studio and we'll have a little example. Bosh, there we go. Right, so we're going to back up a database, SQL Undercover. So we're going to start off with a simple backup command, backup database to disk equals my backup location, C SQL backups, and my backup file is SQL Undercover.back. We're going to use with stats, as I've mentioned. We're going to use with checksum and compression. So let's run that. And straight away, it's quick. The database is sanitized. It takes no time to back this thing up. But we can see we're getting this little progress. We're getting 10%. We're getting 20%. And if you've got a big database of a backup that's taking maybe hours, this is quite useful to know. It's quite useful to know exactly kind of where you're at. Again, in a future module, I'll show you another way of getting that information and kind of getting estimated finish times, but for now this is kind of handy. So let's just quickly have a quick look on SQL backups, and there we have it. There's our SQL Undercover backup file. Easy as that. Right. So now let's hook back to my slides. So now we can back up a database. How do we go about restoring a database? So the restore command is very similar to the backup command actually. We start off with restore database and we give it our database name. We say where that backup is. So we're going to say in this case from disk. Again, backup location and the file name. Again, there are a couple of whiz commands we can use. We've got with move. So this is kind of handy if we want to make a copy of a database or change the location of the physical underlying files. But again, don't worry about this too much. We'll look at that in a future module. There's also a replace with. Now replace is very important because replace is kind of like a switch off the safety mechanism. When we do a restore, there's a few little checks that SQL Server is going to do. Okay, with putting replace on, kind of switches off this safety catch. So what exactly does with replace override? It allows us to overriding a database from a different server. So let's just say, for example, we want to restore our SQL Undercover database. We go and we get our file, our SQL Undercover.back file, and we restore it. But we've made a mistake. We've done a bit of boo-boo. We've gone and got the development backup file and we've just restored it into production. That's going to be pretty bad news. So SQL would normally not let us do that. It's going to say to us, hang on, you can't do this. You can't do this. You can't take a backup from that server and restore it from here because it's come from a different place. Switch on with replace. SQL's going to go, yeah, sure, off you go, do that. So, that's kind of important. We might want to take our production and put it in development. In that case, we would use with replace. But we're not often going to go from development into production. But it's very easy to do that. When you've got backups that are very similarly named, it's easy. I know I've known people do it, and I'm sure most people out there have probably known someone that has accidentally restored a copy of the wrong database. It allows overwriting existing files aren't part of online databases. So normally, again, if we would go restore SQL Undercover as a new database somewhere, it's going to put down a SQL Undercover MDF file. Now, if there happens to already be a SQL Undercover MDF file on our disk, normally SQL's going to say, you know, I can't do that. I can't create a new SQL Undercover MDF file because it exists. It's going to grizzle about that. We put replace on, we put with replace on, it's going to go, yeah, that's fine. I'll just override that, that's cool. So again, something to be a little bit careful with. We might want it to do that, we might not. And it also allows us to restore a database which hasn't had a table log backup. Again, I'm not going to go too much into that now. That's something we're going to look at in a future module. So let's quickly dive back over to Management Studio. And let's look at restoring a backup. So we're going to restore SQL Undercover. We're going to store it from disk, from the location we've just put in. I'm going to use with stats. I've put replace in. I'll put replace in because let's just try it with replace in this case. So as I've said before, with replace, get into the habit of not using with replace. Okay, putting with replace in as standard is dangerous. So to try not to do that. I'm getting a tail log backup issue. So again, I'm not going to cover that now, but I'm just going to pop with replace in just to get me around that. So let's restore our database from disk. It's going to think about it for a while. It's going to give us, again, because we've got with stats, we can see a nice little percentage. And we've now restored our database from that file we last took. Good stuff, yeah? So that's full backups. That's how we take and restore a full backup. So what now about differential backups? Differential backups. So what is a differential backup? So a differential backup, it contains all the changed data since the last full backup. It's going to be, because of that, you know, we're not taking a copy of the whole database. We're only going to take those pages that have changed since the last full backup. Because of that, a differential backup is usually much smaller and much quicker. So, you know, why would we want to use a differential backup? You know, it's going to be great. Say we've got a big database, you know, we need to back this thing up every night. But, you know, this thing is terabytes and terabytes in size. We don't want to be taking a full backup every night. So we might take a full backup once a week. Then each night we're then going to just take a differential backup. It's just going to make our backup process much quicker. And it still gives us that kind of, that recovery point, that 24-hour recovery point. So the differential backup command, let's have a little look at the differential backup command. Now it's absolutely identical to the full backup command, except we have the with differential option specified. So let's just jump over a quick demo of a differential backup. So let me just switch on that screen and have a look at taking a differential backup. So as I said, it's exactly the same as a full backup command, except we use with differential. So again, backup database to wherever we want to stick it. Now I've changed, when I do diffs, I use a .diff extension, so I can tell the difference between a diff and a full. I know a lot of people use a back as well. Whether it's diff or a full, they still use back. There's no real right or wrong way of doing it. And the difference is, though, you put with differential. Of course, you actually should, as I said before, you should always use checksum. You should always use compression. Naughty me for not doing it. And again, I will stick stats in there. So let's just take our differential backup. That'll bosh through really quickly, because remember, a differential backup is only going to be picking up the changes since the last full backup. Now, the last full backup was done about 5 minutes ago, so there's not many changes there at all. So that's going to be really quick. So let's go and have a little look at what that looks like. There's our differential backup. So yeah, so we can see our full backup, you know, it's normally almost 2 meg. Our diff, only 64K, you know, because obviously nothing's changed. It's holding a much smaller amount of data in there. It's only holding any changes. So that is taking a differential backup. So what about restoring a differential backup? Again, it's very similar to restoring full backup. So first thing we need to do is restore a full backup. When we restore a full backup and we want to play in any further backups, we need to make sure we set with no recovery. So with no recovery, it's going to stop the database coming back online after the backup. Normally, you restore a backup, the database comes straight back online and we can access it. If you set with no recovery, the database stays in a recovering state. Now we can't, it's not accessible, but it allows us then to play in differential backups and transactional backups, which is something, again, we'll talk about in a future module. But it allows us just to keep playing in different backups. We then restore our differential backup. So let's have a little look at how we restore a differential backup. So again, let's just hop on over to Management Studio. So restoring a differential backup. So first thing we're going to do is restore our full backup, which we know how to do that. Restore a full backup. Bosh, that's done. Now let's restore our differential backups, restore database from disk. Exactly the same command. So restore database. It's going to grizzle, it's going to complain. Why is it complaining? It's complaining because we didn't put no recovery in our full backup. So let's have a look at our database. So we can see our database is showing us online. You know, we can access this thing, we can have a look at the tables that are in there. It's completely online. So that's not what we want. So we need to remember to use no recovery. So let's try it again. Exactly same command, backup, restore database from disk with stats replaced with this time with no recovery set. Let's run that. It completes. Now let's look at our database now. Now the restore has completed. You know, our database restore has completed, but if we refresh, we can see that SQL Undercover is showing as restoring. It's showing as restoring because we've set that no recovery option. And it's only when it's in this restoring state that we can then play in further backups. So now with it in restoring, let's try exactly the same thing again. We're going to restore database, SQL Undercover, from disk. We're going to use our diff file, and again we've got with stats set. So let's just restore it now. And because we're in no recovery, it now completes. It completes nicely. If we then come back and look at our database, we can refresh it, and the database is now online. So we've now restored that differential backup. So that pretty much brings us to the end of our first module. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you've learned something. And tune in again very, very soon for the next part of this course. Thank you very much.